Hello, I'm Wade. Thank you for joining us today on our new program. Journey to Italy is considered as one of the most romantic films ever made. It was actually directed by Roberto Rossellini, a pioneer in the Italian neorealism movement from the 1940s to the early 50s. This film not only stands out in Rossellini's filmography because of its incredible cast with Ingrid Bergman and George Sanders, who were both at their peak of power in cinema, but also aesthetically, it's Rossellini's official departure to the neorealism movement. The film follows the couple Alex and Catherine's journey to Italy to sell off an inherited house. During the time they spent in Italy, they were forced to confront the complicated feelings they had for each other, the resentment, jealousy, anger. But overcoming all of these emotions, they thrive to acknowledge their love for each other. The film itself is uneventful with minimal plot going on screen, requesting the audience to wander along with these two main characters. Take a look at the opening sequence of this film. It's amazing how Rossellini was able to establish their dysfunctional marriage through only a few shots of Alex and Catherine's chit-chatting.
If only you'd listened to me, we could have come by plane. We would have been back home a week ago.
But I wanted you to take a rest. It didn't occur to me that it would be so boring for you to be alone with me.
What's that got to do with it? I'm just bored because I've got nothing to do.
This is the first time that we've been really alone ever since we married.
What separates this film from any of the pictures at the time was the nuance Rossellini captured. He managed to shift his style of filmmaking from highly relying on stories and plot to creating slow, meditating fragments of bourgeois life, marking the first time cinema entered into a new age of modernism. So let's take a pause here. In order to understand the brilliance of this picture, I'll have to give you a brief introduction to the neorealism movement. In the mid-1920s to the 1940s, Italian cinema was famous for its extravagant set pieces and luxurious production design due to the massive support from the government who considered cinema as one of the most effective ways to promote propaganda, such as telefoni bianchi, or the white telephone, essentially just an imitation of American screwball comedy. It was often focused on glamour and lives of the wealthy. They reinforced the family value and subservient to the authorities. And more importantly, they were forbidden from examining the social problems. After the Italian army surrendered itself to the Allies in 1943, the Italian movie industry lost all the advantage it once had. Most major studios were shut down. The economy was devastated, and the majority of people were deprived of jobs and forced to live impoverished lives. It was the hard condition at the time that nurtured neorealism, and Rossellini's sensibility to humanity shifted the focus of numerous Italian filmmakers back to the day-to-day life among downtrodden people.
The story how Open City was created is extraordinary because nobody can imagine the sacrifice, the ideas, the fantasy to make a movie in a town like Rome just after the war, and the North was not yet finished the war, to make a movie without money, without set, without lamps, without studios. It was an unbelievable adventure.
Rome, Open City, is the first Rossellini's neorealism trilogy, which became the first post-war Italian film that gained major acclaim and became a global success. But before all the accolades, the process of making the film was a hostile environment for filmmaking. At a certain point during the shoot, Rossellini's crew even ran out of film, so they ended up using fogged or scratched reels that Signal Corp, a broadcasting center for US military, had thrown away, imposing a documentary texture to the picture. Still, with all the setbacks Rossellini encountered, it ended up allowing for him to capture the reality more authentically.
I was immensely struck by the excitement of it, the style, of course, the roughness, what we would call the roughness of its style, and undoubtedly that brought the film much closer to reality than the kind of dramatic war films we'd had from Hollywood or from Britain.
Despite all the success and being critically acclaimed during the neo-realism movement, Rossellini felt the need to break through, not necessarily commercially, but to enter a different field of cinema.
I realized that was not enough what I have done with Open City. In reality, my position was a moral position. My starting point was a moral position. So being a moral position, I had the feeling that I was a little bit cheating, you know. In Open City, not consciously, with consciousness, but you know, by the use of the thing. So I tried to purify the thing, to refine, to purify.
It was at this time he would go on and meet the woman who would change his whole life and legacy, Ingrid Bergman. At the time, Ingrid Bergman was probably the biggest superstar on the planet. It was a shock to the whole world when Ingrid Bergman announced that she was leaving her then husband for some Italian director named Roberto. Nevertheless, the megastar was deeply infatuated with Rossellini's talent for filmmaking. Here's what she wrote to Rossellini after she saw Rossellini's pictures.
Dear Mr. Rossellini, I saw your films Open City and Payson and enjoyed them very much. If you need a Swedish actress who speaks English very well, a little German, who can make herself understood in French, and can only say ti amo in Italian, then I'll come and make a film with you.
The intense affection between the two had sparked since the very first letter they exchanged. They proceeded to work together on a film called Stromboli, causing each of them to leave their previous spouses, which became quite a scandal at the time.
Stromboli was the first Italian film I ever saw on a big screen in a theater. Even at the age of 7, you could feel the scandalous air around the movie. I mean, you can almost taste it right there in the theater. Of course, I'd overheard my parents talking privately about the details. Rossellini and his star Ingrid Bergman had had an affair and then a child out of wedlock. Now, today it doesn't seem like a very big thing, but it was back then. They were condemned throughout America, and not just by the church this time. They were actually condemned on the floor of the American Senate.
It was a combination of passion, that I fell in love with a man that was so different from any other man that I'd ever known, and it was my boredom in Hollywood. And the more I worked there, the more I wanted to break out of it and do something different. But I wanted to do something that they didn't expect me to do.
He was not a fool, he was a poet.
What's the difference?
Charles wrote some wonderful poems.
I must get one of his books.
Well, you won't find any. He was too young to have any of his books published.
Then how did you know about them?
He read them to me. I even copied some. Temple of the Spirit. No longer bodies, but pure ascetic images, compared to which mere thought seems flesh, heavy, dim. He wrote them here in Italy while he was in the war.
I never knew you were such great friends.
Oh, I knew him before I met you.
Were you in love with him?
No, but we got on terribly well together. I saw a great deal of him at Copping Farm. Then he got desperately ill.
Just like any relationship that goes through the inevitable stages to the eventual heartbreak, 3 years prior to the couple's divorce in 1957, Rossellini made this honest film, which reflects the actual relationship between him and Bergman at the time.
There's a great intimacy about them. For example, in Journey to Italy, a wonderful sequence where George Sanders comes home late, comes back to the hotel late, and she pretends that she's asleep. and you watch all the details. Who turns on a light, who opens a door. All of this going on so that they can avoid each other, and then finally, they finally have to acknowledge each other.
Yes? What is it?
I just wanted to make sure it was you.
Who did you think it was?
I was sound asleep. I had so much sun and air today that I was dead tired. I fell asleep almost immediately.
Everything is done with this very, very intimate, personal detail. They're almost like letters to each other in a way. And the conflicts are from a very, very personal, intimate, and lifelike area. And they're more experimental because of that.
In the seemingly plotless segment of Catherine's touring the museum, something inside Catherine was awakened. That urge is probed inside the idea of time, not only for the character herself, but for the filmmaker too. Rossellini raised an important question here. What material is worth putting on screen? Is everyday life less interesting than the traditional arc of a story? Or perhaps it could be just as fascinating, maybe even poetic.
It looks like everybody takes a rest around here, except me.
Oh, it's wonderful.
The impact was a negative one at first, but mainly because the power of neo-realism movement, which gives the spiritual rehabilitation of an entire culture and people through cinema. And the picture Rossellini made with Bergam were looked at as complete rejections of what was so popular at the time, the neo-realism.
What do you do when you change how the world thinks of cinema? What's next? I mean, do you keep making the same kind of film? Or if you're a person like Rossellini, if you are, you try something experimental.
How can they believe in that? They're like a bunch of children.
Children are happy. Alex, I don't want you to hate me. I don't want it to finish this way.
Catherine, what are you driving at? The game you're trying to play, you've never understood me, you've never even tried. Now this nonsense, what is it you want?
Nothing. I despise you.
Well, come on, let's get out of this crowd.
The miracle that occurs at the end of Journey to Italy is really the realization of their love for each other. And part of that love is the anger and the alienation they felt all the way through the story. This is part of the journey that they have to take. And so when I saw that the two of them somehow at the end of the picture find each other again, I always found that so moving.
Catherine, what's wrong with us? Why do we torture one another?
When you say things that hurt me, I try to hurt you back, don't you see? But I can't any longer because I love you.
It's the most modern film, I think, Journey to Italy, that began modern cinema in a way. And it isn't just a change in style. It was a change in the execution of art, the perception of it, and the perception of the world, I should say, through art. It seems to be observant of just the very texture and roughness of everyday existence, everyday life. It's raising cinema to another level.
Before Journey to Italy in 1954, we were blessed with maestros from all around the world, such as Hitchcock, Elia Kazan, Kurosawa, and Brenson, producing tons of beautiful film. But only until the release of this picture, we were able to see artists using cinema as a medium to tell deep personal experiences. Like Scorsese said, the more personal, the more experiential it is. One has to remember, cinema wasn't considered as a serious art form until 1950, with the advocating of auteur theory, and an artist like Rossellini has definitely made an enormous contribution to the art form, inspiring the countless generation of filmmakers to tell their personal stories as well. This movie was much ahead of its time, so do yourself a favor, go check this movie out, you won't regret it.